an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Blackflame. Cradle, Book 3. Chapters 11, 12, and 13. In these chapters, we've got another test for Lindon, but this time, Yerin is along for the ride, and she is getting a little bit of frustration at this point. Also, we get to see Jai Long dealing with some people in a very satisfying manner, to be honest, and Suriel gets an interesting message. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. I actually have read this section twice now because I was so eager to find out what would happen next that I immediately listened to the audiobook after last episode, even though I knew that I had 4 days until I was going to record again. And then I just re-listened to it all today. And I am realizing that, so first of all, I just want to talk about Jai Long because his section is fairly short in these 3 chapters. He only gets one brief moment, but I find it really interesting. So we are already familiar with the fact that the Jai clan is harassing the Aurelius. Are they also called a clan? Or are they just called the Aurelius family? I find it really interesting how everybody reacted to the Aurelius family showing up in the wilds when here they're being pushed around so much. That's not to say that I don't think it doesn't make any sense, but I feel like I'm missing something about the connection there. Maybe it's just the fact that, well, sure, the Jai clan can push them around because they are super powerful here, but they don't have the same kind of foothold in the wilds. And maybe, but the wilds, it seemed like the Jai clan was fairly well established there. It seemed like they had as many people as the Fishers. I don't know. But regardless, Jai Long is out here looking for trouble. And he stumbles across a bunch of his family, in quotes, harassing Aurelius street sweepers. And this is really kind of amazing to me that it turns out what Eithan had said to Lindon and Yerin way early in the book about being the best the best janitor is not entirely untrue. I have no doubt that he was raised in the way that he described, but I just didn't know how much to believe about the Aurelius family's function in this kingdom. And finding out that that is essentially their job, actually, is very surprising and sort of gratifying in a way. I rather like that. I just didn't, I kind of expected that maybe it was a simplification of a more dramatic job that their deal, because when they first arrive, there's a mention of how there's a spontaneous spirit that showed up in these sewers because there was a dump of I think dead matter and there was something else that got thrown together. And so I kind of expected that the Aurelius family was going to be, they were going to be the family that was assigned to deal with things like that, like odd creatures that popped up. And one could call that cleanup. One could even call it a sort of pest control. But then you see here that they are actually just sweeping the street and they have brooms. And that's just literally what they are dealing with. And I was just very surprised that I got to see Jailong dealing with these people in a way that was really, really, really satisfying, because they are such assholes that it was impossible for me to be as, like, and this keeps happening. I keep expecting for Jailong to go too far for me, personally. I keep expecting myself to be there's going to be a line that he has crossed that I'm going to be feeling like, okay, you know what? I am fully not on your side at all anymore. And every time that it gets anywhere near that, it sort of, I wind up being pulled back and not feeling that after all. And I don't know if that's like purposeful by, like, you know, the way that the author intended it specifically, or if my line is further out than most people's line would be. And maybe that's my problem. But this, I mean, of course this is a pretense, right? He is already looking for trouble. And so he comes into this intending to do something violent and dramatic. So to say that he just, like, kills these people because they're picking on Aurelius' family, like, that really has nothing to do with it. But I'm just going to read a little bit of this. A few yards down the street, 3 Logolds of the Jai clan were harassing an Aurelius street sweeping crew. Right on schedule. The Jai spears were still slung over their backs, so they hadn't managed to provoke a fight yet. Their metallic black hair gleamed in the light of the dying sun. The blue-clad servants of the Aurelius family were huddled against a wall like trapped deer. One of them clutched a broken broom. "You struck him," a young Jai woman said, pointing at her clansmen. "Everyone saw you. Just admit it. Say it." So Jailong comes up and he asks this woman, "Hey, what's going on over here?" And this woman turns to look at him and immediately is very, like, contemptuous of him. It's a combination of, like, he's not wearing anything that signifies he's from a particular house of importance. He is wearing this, like, wrapping on his face that's not decorative, or it's not anything that would indicate that he has stature of any kind. And she immediately recommends that, you know, we could weave you a mask that an underlord would be proud to wear even on a budget. And when he first asks her what happened, she tells him, it's as you saw, one of the family attacked that warrior from behind. And then he flares his power a little bit and she feels it. And she immediately goes, or I might be mistaken. I might have seen the Jai clan corner them unprovoked. Unless Honorable Sir is from the Jai clan, I'm prepared to swear that the Aurelius dogs. And I was just like, oh man, look, I am certain that this kind of behavior does increase the longevity of your life. I wouldn't doubt it. Nevertheless, it is painful to watch. Have some fucking dignity. Christ's sake. But she doesn't. So it says he wouldn't need to use the Ancestor Spear after all. The 3 Jai Logolds dipped their heads in his direction. "Good evening to you, High Gold," the woman said warily. "Are you perhaps from a branch family?" The white lines of flowing starlight had begun creeping over his skin. The world slowed. His original plan was to find a team of Jai Logolds and kill 2 of them, capturing their remnants and letting the 3rd report him to the Jai clan. As long as no one saw the Ancestor Spear, they would only send a single High Gold after him next time. If he couldn't let one live, he would use the spear to drain all of them and eliminate all witnesses. But there were too many witnesses on the street to eliminate, and plenty to bring word back to the Jai clan that a rogue High Gold was hunting their people. So long as he didn't draw his spear, the clan would hear exactly what he wanted them to. These Logolds might not have been high in the rankings, but they were at least trained. Before the marks of flowing starlight were visible, they'd already sensed him, pulling out their spears and assuming aggressive stances. Too late. So he attacks and takes all of them down. And it's really kind of gruesome to hear that this woman's like hair clinked against the ground when her when she gets decapitated. And when her head hits the street, you know how the Jai clan's gold sign is that they have helmet hair, very literally. It just makes this clinking sound, and I was just like, oh, that is brutal. Also, I find it pretty interesting that their gold sign continues to exist after they're killed. I don't know why, but I had sort of had this idea that if you died, your gold sign would vanish. Like, if it was something that was that, you know, if I had been imagining a death scene for Jai Long, I think I would have thought that the remnant he tied himself to would flee, and so his face would return to normal. The thing is, the remnants do flee, but they don't do it immediately. It takes a minute. So I don't know if after the remnants, like, eventually, because we see later how he traps a couple of them, they are there. Does the gold sign disappear then, or is that a permanent fixed change? It doesn't really matter. I'm just curious about how that works. And I love the reaction. Everybody, like, there are some people who are just like, oh, God, man, I'm trying to walk, and now there's blood everywhere. There's somebody else who's just like, man, it stinks like blood out here. I'm running a restaurant, dude. What are you doing? And I just kind of love this. Nobody's like, I can't believe you killed these people. Nobody gives a shit about that. All of them as a group are just basically like, that was just kind of like thoughtless, you know? Can you just consider that there are other people around before you go and make a mess and cause a scene and do all of this? And that is just so revealing about this whole culture. I find it really, really funny in its way. Like, it's a dark kind of humor, but nevertheless. Will you be dealing with the remnants, Honored High Gold? One of the Aurelius street sweepers asked, or should we have a crew dispose of them? Jai Long pulled some scripted paper seals from his pocket, which he'd prepared for exactly this occasion. He hardly had to stretch out his perception to feel the sources of toxic Madra moving toward him, the sand vipers, here to help him capture the remnants for later consumption. And at this point, somebody yells something about the Sky Sworn. Again, a hint to us of this family that I think this is a really interesting narrative device. Is this author is coping with introducing us to a number of very high-ranking families, clearly, with different, I don't even want to say objectives, because in a lot of ways we don't know many of their objectives, but they have certain cultures within their communities and certain gold signs and certain focuses. And it's really hard to give a reader information about a variety of peoples when the structure of the world you're building is also really alien. That's a lot of information for a reader to keep track of. So what the author has done is he has us like meet the Jai clan and the Sand Snakes, right? Or not Sand Snakes. Oh my God. I got a Song of Ice and Fire reference stuck in there. Sand Vipers. We meet them right out of the gate when we come to the Desolate Wilds. The Fishers sort of get involved there. And that's sort of an easy one because the Fishers have a very distinctive name that has a very distinctive sort of technique behind it. So that winds up being sort of easy to center your brain around. Plus, our two protagonists wind up spending a lot of time with the Fisher clan. And the Jai clan, we have the POV of Jai Long in that clan. And that helps us establish what they are about, even if he isn't really a part of it anymore. And he's the bridge to the Sand Vipers and us understanding what's going on with them. So it's a very tidy way of getting us in there. And then we come to the Aurelius faction, and they are talked about a lot before we see them. So we get used to hearing the name. We get used to knowing that people are like intimidated by them. They are a force in the story in a way before we ever meet them, although we've already met one, but we don't know that. And now we have the Skysworn being mentioned more than once here before we meet them, so that they are something that gets established and we feel a sort of recognition before they actually enter the story. And I think that's just a very clever way to roll things out and make it feel natural. Because there is nothing that can sort of take me out of a story more than dropping a whole bunch of information at once that I'm meant to somehow retain. Or a too casual mention from people that doesn't actually feel like organic. It'll feel a lot of times like a big waving flag on the author's part of like, so-and-so mentioned such and such. And don't you think that's... It can feel really ham-fisted and obvious. Just mentioning the Aurelius family is coming and everybody freaking out. That's a very specific way of doing it versus having like, well, you know that the Aurelius family are very powerful and that they come from such and such. You know, the info dump via a character, in other words. And I think that it can be a real trick to have a story that has this many different families and factions and clans in it, and us be able to actually keep track of them. You have to zero in on like main players and then slowly expand outward. And it's just an interest. I am somebody who would like to write one day. I started writing, kind of gave it up for a bit, and I'm sort of thinking about it again. And I like to take note of the graceful way that authors pull things like this off, because I think it's something that it's easy to not notice when it's done really well. That's the problem, is when it's done super well, it's not really appreciated because it feels natural and your brain just worked that way. But when it's done badly, you sure fucking know that was awkward and weird, and I sure didn't retain any of that. That was a problem that I had with the Witcher series. The Witcher series does a lot of just like saying the names of people and dropping those names, or dropping the names of the countries they're associated with into conversations with no context and nothing behind it. And I'm supposed to remember, and I just couldn't remember. So he captures all of these remnants, and it says, as soon as I started walking, the Aurelius family closed back in to clean up the mess. And I think I said last episode how it's sort of funny that he's planning to come here and just lay waste to the Jai family. And the Aurelius, they're having problems with the Jai clan. So he's going to be sort of helping them out in a way. And he realizes that here and begins laughing. And I had forgotten, it was mentioned earlier that his remnant, the serpent, gave him this weird high, like, screeching sort of laugh. And I think that's incredibly interesting, that apparently his voice is mostly unchanged from what I've heard, but his laugh specifically is the thing that's fucked up, and everybody sort of backs away from him when they hear it. I just think that's creepy, and I like that a lot. Like, having everything be the same about a person in terms of you know, obviously his face is totally different and has been like disfigured, but your voice, that is next to your face. I feel like for those of us who are able to speak, your voice is like such an identifying factor, and for that to be completely changed is extremely unsettling. But to have it be mostly the same, and then there just be this one tick that you can't control, that really is sort of like, I feel like that's more subtle and more effective somehow. So anyway, that's all of Jailong's deal. I just wanted to talk about that out of the gate, because I tend to leave Jailong for last, and then I run out of fucking time. So let me just talk about him right out of the gate. So then we go, I'm going to go back to the beginning to Orthos, who is talking with Lindon. And I really enjoy Orthos. He's like, weird. He's this combo of like, I shouldn't have to teach you because you're so far below me, but also, you know, you're far below me. And I find that sort of endearing, and you're very eager to learn. And so I'm sort of affectionate and like enjoying this. And Orthos talking to, Lindon, and he says, a stone builds earth aura, An ordinary stone has only a mouthful of aura, but as the centuries pass, it grows stronger and stronger. It will continue absorbing power from the earth until it transforms. If left undisturbed, an ordinary rock will grow into a nugget of Titan's bone, all but unbreakable. I'm assuming Titan's bone is either a diamond? No, I figure it's a diamond. Something like a diamond, right? And Lindon says, well, if all stone, if it was just like for time that made them strong, wouldn't all stone be unbreakable by now? And he explains this, and I'm not entirely sure that I get it. I'm going to read this. Sacred artists have an endless appetite. A vein of vital aura piling up in the ground is a treasure trove for earth artists. They will stop at nothing to harvest it for their own advancement. A single candle flame might be enough for you to cycle, but for a true expert, such a weak source is useless. They might as well try eating air. Advancement is an endless hunt for greater and greater sources of power. You start by feeding on the aura and candles and campfires, but sooner than you think you'll be hunting for dragon hearts and sunreaver stones and sacred flames, always climbing. So what I think he is saying is basically sacred artists steal all of the fucking Madra and don't leave anything for the rocks to grow into these diamonds because they've taken it all, which we've seen, because Lindon says he had never thought of aura as something that could be taken away, but he has seen like the way that it was stolen by the pyramid. So I thought that was kind of a weird line. Maybe it just wasn't something that he really like, that seemed like a temporary thing to him, and that it would eventually come back. But yeah, that's mentioned right here. Lindon had thought of that process as something like taking a breath. The ruins may have inhaled, but that didn't mean there was any less air outside. Now he imagined it more like draining a bucket and waiting for rain to fill it back up. So yeah, this is, an interesting concept of human beings like taking from nature that could also use that same aura. This isn't an infinite resource, and taking does not have no repercussions. It's not absolutely necessarily in balance with nature at all times, depending on the people and what they're trying to do. So what use is there for fire aura? Surely you can set things on fire with Madra rather than bothering with a ruler technique. And he says, for some paths this is true. For ours, imagine you have finished a battle. Your breath has driven your enemies before you, and now their corpses lie smoldering on the field. And he pulls this like piece of branch and tree root out of the wall, spits it on the ground, and he says, there is no flight from your fury, and turns and glares at it, and it just explodes into flames. It says it was the healthy orange of a natural flame, not the dark stain of Blackflame, though it was spotted with the odd blotch of black or red. The fire roared for a second, lapping up the walls as though looking for something else to consume, and then died in an instant. Of the arm-length root, there was nothing left but ash. I have like a cat hair up my nose or something. Oh my god, I'm dying here. Anybody who's not like watching this is like, why are you telling me this? I'm sorry. It's because I'm on camera and I'm just like tickling at my nose, and I'm sure it's very distracting. And he says, we call it the Void Dragon's Dance. In one moment, the flames devour everything on the battlefield, leaving only smoke and dust. And Lindon says, as long as there's enough fire around to begin with. And I found that to be interesting. Like, I keep forgetting that without a source, this stuff doesn't exactly work out for you. So it's almost like a kind of physics. You know, how physics is like, well, there has to be an equal and opposite reaction. But there has to be sword Madra in the air for you to be able to pull on that. There has to be fire Madra. So he still needs that. I keep sort of thinking of it as something that he can create because his core is filled with this flame now. And forgetting his core is filled with it because he has cycled it by taking it into himself. He didn't produce that. He refined it in his body, but it doesn't just get created there. And it's just something that I keep having to remind myself. I have a mixed up idea of how this works. So he says, and if you have enough time, taking control of aura takes time and concentration. You can toss striker techniques out with every breath, but a widespread ruler technique takes time to build. So he tells Lindon to sit down and to cycle. And black flame aura will come as you call and will merge easily with your core. Cycle for 3 days, and then the next stage of your training will begin. And Lindon's mid-sentence, trying to be like, hey, why don't you wait until I get this and too late, Orthos is gone. So then we go to Yerin, and she is out here sparring with Eithan. And we have this moment of her, and this is interesting because I feel like it's been a minute since we've been inside her head. So hearing the way that her remnant works, her gold sign, I guess, really, it seems to be in, what's the word I want? It's in conflict with what she wants it to do. So she's supposed to be able to direct it. But because, and Eithan keeps on reminding her of this, because of the fact that she's insisting on holding on to the entire remnant of her teacher and not, as he puts it, stripping it down for parts, that is causing her gold sign to have a mind of its own and not operate the way that she is trying to get it to operate. And I think that's really interesting in terms of, because I don't have a ton of faith in either direction on whether or not Yerin is right or whether or not Eithan is right. Eithan really insists that Yerin is making a mistake, that she's slowing herself down, that she's too attached to this remnant because of how much that person meant to her, and that she needs to let it go because what she is attempting to do, which is sort of hold on to the specter of a person whom she loves, he's just essentially like, man, that is a losing battle. That is not going to do anything for you. It's never going to feel like he's back. You're just drawing this pain out. And you could have reached like low, what is she? She's a low gold. I think he says she could have reached high gold by now if she would just leave that and move forward. Yerin is of the opinion that because Eithan is used to dealing with people who are ordinary and they're ordinary remnants, he only has an idea how it works with remnants of ordinary people, and her sword sage master was anything but, and his remnant works differently. She has this idea that there is something to be gained, very specifically something more that he is trying to teach her. And Eithan is not entirely wrong in terms of her holding on because of her grief. She even admits that to herself, finally. But as much as Eithan is a very advanced human being with the ability to see what people are going to do and having just basically a lot of superpowers, I have to think there are things that Eithan doesn't even know about how the world operates. So as much as he seems so certain that Yerin is making a bad decision here, I can't entirely discount Yerin's feeling that there is something more to this remnant, because this sword sage, even Eithan is like awed by who that sword sage was and what he has managed to teach Yerin. And as we see later, Cassius is super impressed with Yerin also. And it's like, man, I really wish I got to meet her master. If they both feel this way, and they are both such advanced people, I am dying to know whether or not she's right, because she very well could be, and Eithan just hasn't dealt with anything like this before. I am a big fan, in general, of laying down a set of rules in a story for how things operate, functioning according to those rules for a long time, and then being like, okay, so that's not actually exclusively how this works, though. Because I think that's a really... It's simultaneously a bit of a surprise for the reader. Not always a huge surprise, but it doesn't have to be. And it's also a nice, like, world building thing, a character building, thing, because we as regular human beings are always thinking we know how shit works and finding out we were wrong. And I think it's a nice reminder in a story to have it be whatever your magic system is, to remind the reader and your characters that they are operating only with the knowledge that they have been taught or managed to discover on their own, which is naturally limited. I do not like it when it feels like everything about the way the system works is known and quantified and all follows the same rules with everybody, you know? So, yeah, if it turns out she's wrong and holding on to this remnant is not really helping her and it's not going to do her any good, so be it. But I'm sort of on her side in terms of just waiting this out a little bit and seeing what could happen. So, yeah, they have this talk here. And then he tells her that they have to go and see Lindon. And he takes her down into the mountain where Lindon's at. Now, I had a question. When they meet again, Lindon is tall. I had forgotten how tall he is, but it seems like he's still growing due to the fact that he is leveling up. She says something here about how his badge is bouncing against his chest, and it's made of iron. I'm trying to find the exact spot here. When chapter 10 ends with him specifically looking through his stuff to switch from iron to jade. Is it just supposed to be that she doesn't look closely enough to realize that it's a jade badge and assumes that it's iron? Because she doesn't look at his badge to tell when Eithan finally mentions, oh, he's, you and a jade should be okay. She uses her senses to reach out and touch Lindon's spirit and feel that he's a jade. I'm trying to find the spot where it's mentioned. Sword aura. I can't find it. Because I just assumed that she would see him and she would see, here it is. He had his bulky brown pack on, both straps, and a black iron medallion showing a hammer. He stood straight as a spear, staring intently at Eithan. So yeah, I thought that was kind of weird that specifically mentioned here, even though we saw that he was switching to the jade before. I don't know why he wouldn't have done that, or if it is just that she didn't notice, but it seems like she paid enough attention to see. So they are both given a test here that is going to take days to complete. So Eithan says it's divided. This course is divided into 3 separate trials. One for the signature enforcer technique of the Blackflames, one for their striker technique, and one for rulers. Blackflame Madra is hard enough to forge that they never developed an official forger technique. But yes, to answer the question on both your minds, you will be taking it together. And this is when he says, you and a jade should be okay. And she looks over at him like, wait, what? And she's like, oh my God. And she thinks that he has leveled up due to elixirs and gets a little bit envious here. I won't call it jealous. She sees that, Lindon's really proud of himself, and she doesn't begrudge him that. But she wants to advance so badly. And the fact that he has managed to go from wood to copper, copper to iron, iron to jade, all in the course of several months, and she hasn't managed to break through into high gold in that time. It's eating at her, even though she knows intellectually that it's way harder to do what she's doing than to do what Lindon is doing in terms of the distance between each of these targets. And also she says her unwelcome guest was tickling the back of her spirit. If she didn't advance soon, she wouldn't keep ahead of it. We keep hearing about this, but we do not know what it is. I know that it's that belt, that red sash of pure Madra that's like blood Madra, but I do not know what it does, how it could possess her, which is what it seems like she is concerned about happening. So Eithan says the Black Flame has attendants and family members on many different paths, but they all train together. And as he's in the middle of saying this, Cassius rolls in. And Eithan gets very frustrated at the fact that Cassius is clearly here to throw a wrench in the works. And Cassius essentially scraps a little here with Eithan, because he starts to be like, I thought we had agreed that we weren't going to do this. Ethan's like talking right over him. Like, obviously I did not agree. Starts to like move on. And then Cassius gets very irritated and starts to talk back. And Eithan literally claps a hand over his mouth. And Cassius goes to draw his weapon. And Yerin here is very approving of the fact that he's about to literally fight back. It was the first time Yerin had seen a scrap of steel in him. That was the attitude a sword artist should have. If spirits stand in your way, cut them down. If an underlord stands in your way, well, you do your best to cut him too. Her master would have approved. But Eithan basically magically tases him and just drops him on the ground. I feel so bad for Cassius. This is so undignified and just so like dismissive. I hate it for him. I really do. He's trying. He's genuinely worried about these two. And this is just something that comes up all the time. This idea of like whether to coddle people. And I use coddle not in like a genuine way. I mean, that's what I think Eithan would call what Cassius wants to do. Cassius would call it just not being abusive. And whether or not to just, put them through the fire. And there is something to be said for both methods. Both of them have their downsides, acute downsides. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But so he says, you can leave whenever you like, but if you leave the way you came in, I'll take that as an admission of defeat. To which Yerin's like, oh, you're giving us a way out? That seems kind of weak, but sure. Which I'm just like, bitch, you need to stop. She is just so prepared to go fucking all out. And he says something, keep your hands off one another. I need you focused, not distracted. And they're both just like, this is so awkward. Lindon asks if he has any elixirs, and Eithan says, we'll be light on elixirs for the next few months, but I'll come deliver whatever we can spare. The Jai clan seized our last refinery in Serpent's Grave. I am very unhappy to hear that, and I want to see some retribution there. Later on, Eithan says that he will go and cope with them, and Cassius is genuinely like relieved to hear that, because obviously Eithan is nobody to fuck with. So, yeah. So they head inside, and really, like, there's a lot to talk about here, but I don't want to get too bogged down in every little detail. Suffice to say, they find this information that's like carved on a wall, and this leads to the reveal that Yerin doesn't know how to read. And Lindon feels really embarrassed initially because he thinks that he doesn't realize that she means she can't read at all. He thinks that she just can't read this language. And he tries to explain, oh, it's really close to like my language, my alphabet. And she's like, well, I can't tell if it's close to mine or not. I can't read that either. And I liked this realization that he has that, you know, he was given this very specific type of education that she was not privy to. And it's another moment of, you know, it's so tempting when you're reading a book like this or you're watching different movies and stuff to see the person who can fight and be a badass as the one who is like at the obvious advantage. And that is because of the setting, of course, you know, like people are constantly fighting for their lives. And so a really good fighter is worth their weight in gold. And it makes you feel as if in the world, that's also hugely important. And in ways it is. But I think that it's a nice reminder that like Lindon has this kind of ability that Yerin doesn't necessarily have. And they each come to the table with different skills. And while it's easy to sort of laugh at the fact that Lindon can't do certain things regarding combat, that doesn't mean he doesn't have his own shit that, you know, helps to balance out what Yerin can do. But there is a technique on the wall, and he thinks it's going to take him days to figure it out. And Yerin's like, days? Honey, no, we don't have that kind of time. So we're going to figure this out. Sit down. I'm going to lead you through it because I think based on that image that I know exactly what it is that they're trying to get you to do. So he sits down and she walks him through how to cycle and what to imagine as this is like, as he's trying to access this technique. And he does it and he feels something really weird. And opens his eyes and tells her, I think I almost had it that time. And she's like laughing at him. And she holds up her sword so that he can see his reflection in it and tells him to do it again. And after a minute, he's able to do it again. And he's entirely engulfed in like black and red flames. And she's like, I'm not going to lie. That looks sinister as fuck. And I think that Jailong is going to need a diaper when he comes to the fight because you're going to be really scary. And I loved that moment so much. However, the technique has, first of all, the major downside of potentially eating him from the inside out, which he reads on the wall and he's like, that can't be right. And I'm like, dude, Eithan told you that it's corrosive. Like, you knew that getting into this. I don't understand why that didn't seem to register for you. But he seems to not really get it until this moment. And she tells him, okay, you have your technique. Come at me and give it a shot and see how it works. And he jumps at her. And basically, he goes like 20 feet and is not prepared for that kind of power. She says it looks like you strapped lightning bolts to your legs. And he had acute pain in his knees when he shot off. Like, this is not a technique that you can just do. And all of a sudden, there is this ability that's like honed and easily controlled. His body isn't super happy with the way he's using it. He's not used to it. He doesn't know how to restrain it. And the problem is that because his body's not used to it, he basically causes himself like minor injuries when he uses it. And so his body then responds by automatically trying to heal the injury he caused himself, which reduces the Madra in his system. So it's costing him a lot to use this technique. And it's just draining his core dry really, really quickly, which comes into play a little bit later. And nevertheless, once they go, they have their like first trial, and there's this like sort of crystal ball that I think he has to like carry to the next section. I'm not even sure what the objective is, but he's hoping that because the things that they have to fight to get to the other side are very slow to form, that maybe they can just skip fighting if they're fast enough and get to the other side without having to fight at all. It's a very typical Lindon technique to try to get around doing the thing. I'm not even mad at him for trying to figure out a way around it, because that's how he has managed to function in the world. But he's a jade now, and he's coming up against more and more intense foes. You still should use your bag of tricks when you can. That's absolutely a valid thing. But you're also, at some point, you're just going to have to learn to actually fight. And this becomes an issue with Yerin in this scene, because she's out here fighting basically the entire army of these creatures, which he thinks are constructs. Then later they say they're not, but I'm going to call them constructs for the sake of this conversation. He watches her fighting and realizes that, like, in the past, he's never really been in a position to, like, sit back and watch and appreciate what she can do. And he is absolutely blown away as he watches her just handling these creatures. Now, we go in her head and we find out she did not feel good in that fight. She felt that she was on the defensive the whole time and didn't stand a chance. And she's very upset about it, because that was partially due to the fact that she's holding on to this remnant, and she's realizing that, like, it is becoming a liability and she doesn't know what to do about it. But from the outside to Lindon, she looks like she's doing amazing. And so to Cassius and Aurelius as well, or Cassius and Eithan, they are watching from another room. And it's like a control room, and Eithan has given Cassius the controls and tells him, if you can push them hard enough that they quit early, I'll let them out. It'll be fun, and I'll drop this whole thing. So it's up to you, but you now have a motivation to really push them. And I, personally, think this is exactly what they need. Cassius, for his part, is really moved at one point, because he's like, finally says something to Eithan about, like, how did they offend you that you want to do this to them? And he's like, no, not offended me. I think I finally, like, made a winning bet this time. And he says, this is irresponsible to the point of negligence. And it says, during the time Cassius had known him, Eithan had behaved like a child playing with toys, like a rich man indulging his idle whims, like a genius in the grip of his eccentricities, and very occasionally, like a powerful and dignified overlord. But now, Cassius found himself watching a new side of Eithan. He looked weary, uncertain. It shook Cassius more than he cared to admit. We settle for so little, Eithan said at last. We protect what we have instead of reaching for more. Even when the door is open, we refuse to walk through it. Cassius, I can take this family through that door. I can drag the rest of them kicking and screaming into a future better than you or I could ever imagine, but I can only see so far. I think these two could be the sails that carry us far beyond this empire. But what if I'm wrong? I could squeeze this family dry, betting on a glorious payout 50 years from now, and the Jai could devour us tomorrow. I feel blind. And Cassius is just like, what? Oh, I don't love this. Later on, they have their, talk after they watch her fight. And Cassius is like annoyed at how buoyant Eithan is again, because he's so delighted with Yerin's performance. But yeah, I thought that this was an interesting, section and a look at slightly more of Eithan's motivation, and it makes sense why Eithan zeroed in on Lindon's mention to Yerin that, the heavens showed you to me, because it feels like Eithan's in pursuit of something that is like Suriel. Like he wants to either become like her or access something like what she has access to. And I don't know, because, we hear later about Suriel and what she looked like when she was just a regular human. So she started off as a regular person, is it because she ascended in the ways, like in these sorts of levels? Is she like, you know, I don't know what other, because I don't think that past Underlord, we know what other levels there are. We saw the other badges and the like wild sort of materials that they're made out of, but that's all. So I don't even know what her level would be called were it to be a level. But yeah, so I think that's interesting that like clearly Eithan has this idea that there's way more. He just doesn't know how to access it, and he's betting on these people. It's just interesting. But back to Yerin. She fights these things. Lindon tries to like skip past. His Madra winds up running out, and so the ball, which is like lit, he can't keep it lit. And he winds up sort of like getting taken down hard because he's not paying attention. He's too busy watching Yerin fight. And the two of them get like this failure gong, and they later on are sitting together and eating at this like terrible campfire that he has made out of this black flame that makes their food taste horrifying. And the whole thing is just rather uncomfortable. This is when he says something about how because she says, whoever left that binding was at least as powerful as Eithan, and it's meant to test your enforcer technique, meaning you're intended to tear through it. That's a tall order when I've got to fight by myself. And she slams her drink down. And he looks at her like shocked, and he says, I thought I would just get in the way. And it says that was the attitude that scraped her nerves. You couldn't always fight when you had a plan or a secret weapon. No one ever waited for you to sleep a full night, have a hot meal, and cycle your Madra before they attacked you. And she says to him, if I waited to fight until I was ready, my bones would be rotting in Sacred Valley right now. You have to dive in there, or you might as well scamper back home. She's very, very irritated. And he says something about, wouldn't Eithan be amazed if we got through this only a day after starting? And she's like, oh my God, dude, if you think we could just skip that and he would let us and not dump us right back at the beginning to do it properly, you're out of your fucking mind. The whole point of this thing is to do it. And sure, I bet that he would be amused at the fact that you found a way to skip it. I'm sure he would think that was a real gas. But don't fool yourself into thinking he would let that be it. Because we already talked about this. You need to learn how to fight as well as how to be slick like you are. That's why we're paired together. He has talked about it. And I had a lot of understanding where she was coming from here, both in the sense that like Lindon is trying to skip things again. I understand how that has served him in the past and why he would attempt to do that again. But also, I'm going to make a weird analogy here, as I am wont to do. Bear with me, and I think you'll see what I'm trying to say here. So, Yerin is an incredibly badass fighter, and Lindon is like in such admiration of her as he's watching her. And at one point, he thinks to himself, "How long would it be before he could fight like that?" But he is making no effort to actually fight. So that's the problem. And like, as he says that, how long until I can fight like that? That's when he gets attacked because he's not paying attention. So Lindon is over here like wanting to achieve what she has, but not risk anything because he doesn't feel ready. And if you are somebody like me who is a perfectionist, you can relate to that. As a perfectionist, I don't want to do anything until I know I can do it, which is the point of practicing, is that you can't do it yet. And so you keep trying until you can. And I don't like that. I like to go into a thing feeling like I'm fucking competent at it already. And that's just not how shit works. And Yerin's point of view here reminds me a lot of women I speak with who are in relationships with men, especially. Usually, like, this can happen in queer relationships as well. But in heterosexual relationships, it's the most common because of the way that men and women are socialized. Men treat the fact that women can cook. Let's say that specifically. I want to talk about the whole domestic front, but let's just say we're talking about cooking only. They treat it as if this is some sort of superpower that women are born with. And obviously, this isn't all heterosexual couples. Plenty of women can't cook. But it's an expectation a lot of the time, especially when raising children, that women be the ones to manage the domestic front and cook. And dudes will make justifications for not helping, not participating in any way, by saying, I'm just going to get in the way. Now, the problem for somebody like me, who I do elaborate kinds of cooking, and I have a very specific way I like things done, I don't accept help. But I know that I don't accept help and I don't expect it. But I don't have kids, and when I'm in the kitchen, it's not the kind of feeling that a lot of women have, where it's just like, I just need to feed myself. Oh my God. Usually when I'm in the kitchen, I'm kind of having a good time a lot of the time. And so men will have this sort of attitude that women just somehow know how to do it, and there's nothing that they could bring to the situation that would be helpful. Not even entertaining for a moment the idea of learning to do what this woman does, because they do not understand that she was taught. And just because she knows how doesn't mean she always knew how. And it doesn't even mean that she is the best out of the two of you. You may learn and find that you're actually better at it than she is. But it's like a combination of a respect and admiration for somebody who can do something well, and a nice way to let yourself off the hook for having to learn how to do a new thing that you're not adept at yet, and being able to keep yourself from feeling any sort of discomfort or awkwardness as you learn something new. Because as an adult, we don't learn new things often anymore. That's something that sort of begins to like fall away as we get into the routine of life and have the same job for a while. Learning new things becomes harder and harder. And I can't tell you the number of times that I have like met dudes who are single who are eating absolute garbage. They're just eating takeout. They're eating like fast food. They're eating boxed frozen stuff or things out of boxes. And they keep saying that they have to find a girlfriend so that they can begin to eat better. And it's like, you are responsible for yourself. Why are you so reliant on finding a partner who will be your mommy? Figure your shit out, dude. Come on. And I really get that vibe from Yerin here. It's like she appreciates that he admires her in his way. She appreciates that he has this technique of finding a shortcut that has really worked for him. But she's starting to get fucking tired. And she's starting to realize that, like, if she doesn't wake him the fuck up, he's never going to try to find his own way through. He's always going to rely on the fact that she's there to save his ass. And I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't get to a point at some point where she decides that she's not going to like save his ass this time, because it's like doing him a favor, honestly, to let him figure it out. Now, that's not to say that if he were about to die that she wouldn't step in, because I think she probably would. But I also think that she would leave it until the last possible moment to step in, because she just wants him to risk something, to put himself out there in that way. Now, granted, we also find out a little bit later that she is feeling bad about the fact that she's holding on to this remnant and that it held her up in the fight. And she might be just lashing out at Lindon because she's mad at herself. But nevertheless, I feel like her overall feeling on this is really valid. So, okay, I have like no time left. I haven't even talked about Suriel. Ugh, I'm so bad at managing my time, you guys. There's just a lot to talk about in these sections. Suriel is, first, we see her like helping somebody from one of the worlds that's being eliminated into a new world, and she opens this portal and lets this woman run away through it. And I think it's a really neat idea. Like, she looks through the portal and sees that the stars aren't even created yet. And it's sort of mentioned that the worlds sort of sprout outwards from the people who join up with them, like seeds. It's a really neat idea. But it's another moment of us seeing Suriel trying to save people if she can. You know, she really does attempt to make sure there are as few casualties as she is allowed. And as she is, like, there's this, I can't remember the name of the particular planet that she's on, or it's not even the planet, it's the, like, timeline, I guess, that she's in, the universe that she's in. But she hears something that sounds like somebody calling her name. It's very, very specific. And she follows it, even though she kind of knows that it could very easily be a trap. And she doesn't really, like, she tells herself essentially that it's worth the risk. And she goes and finds this, like, area that has all of these pods in it. And there are people inside of them, and there's like millions of them. And there is a message from Ozriel. And there's also some evidence that might point to the fact that Ozriel is now dead. It's unclear. She seems to think that's likely what happened. But she's not... It doesn't seem like she has a... She's trying not to jump to conclusions. It just feels like the evidence points in that direction, because the recording that he left her, this message, gets cut off. And there is this, like, really old blood on the wall that sounds to her like it, like, coincides with where he was standing in the room and the fight that would have broken out here. And there's often, like, there are cracks in the wall when she comes in that feel like chaos. And it says cracks like these were often left behind after an Abaddon's battle. So he leaves this message that has been corrupted by the chaos in the room. But her little presence is able to sort of fill in the gaps. And I'm going to find the, like, filled in message here. Suriel, you're looking lovely today, I'm sure. I'll get to the point because I have an unexpected visitor who needs murdered. I did not abandon you. I have identified the 16 worlds that will be corrupted while I'm gone, and I've prepared a facility like this one in each. I'm sure Machiel will send Gadriel, and then you'll volunteer. If I'm still gone, chaotic interferences make it impossible to predict beyond 16, so go ahead and initiate quarantine. I shouldn't take much longer unless this actually kills me. We have to change, Suriel. If I didn't act, it would all stay the same. I don't... And then it's cut off. So when he says we have to change, I have no idea what that means. But he seems to be ready to do some sort of paradigm shift, and apparently there was somebody who did not agree with him. Now, I don't know that he's dead. It feels that way, but I don't know. I don't know. And she is very afraid, so it doesn't seem like it's impossible for him to be killed, you know? Like, that doesn't seem like it's off the table. But I enjoy the weirdness of the Suriel sections. I mean, not to say that, like, Lindon and Yerin's aren't weird also, but it's just so very different from the rest of what we are seeing that it gives more of an idea of, like, the potential of continuing to move forward on these levels. And I like the idea that there's this sort of, like, bigger, badder battle out there that's potentially happening. So, yeah, those sections this was a really good one. This was very compelling. Listening to it again, I found myself just as interested as the first time. So, All right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again so much to Andy for commissioning this episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for listening. I hope you're enjoying it. And I will be seeing you again on Friday with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.